Here is something that almost nobody in personal finance will say out loud. Most people will never, not this year, not in 5 years, not ever escape the financial level they're currently living in. That's not pessimism. That's pattern recognition. After studying how money actually moves, not the motivational version, the real version there is a structure underneath everything. A ladder, 6 rungs, and almost every person walking the planet right now is frozen on one of them, convinced they're climbing, when in reality, they haven't moved in years. By the end of this video, I'm going to show you exactly which rung you're on, why you haven't moved, and what it actually costs to go up, because it will cost you something. Every single level does. Let's start at the bottom. The first rung is called the pressure trap, and roughly 40% of Americans live here right now. I'm not guessing. The Federal Reserve's own data shows that 4 in 10 adults cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. $400. At this stage, every financial decision you make is driven by one thing: urgency. You're not thinking strategically. You can't. When you're deciding between electricity and groceries, strategy doesn't enter the conversation. Here's what makes this stage so psychologically destructive, and this is the part most finance channels skip over entirely. Chronic financial pressure doesn't just affect your bank account. Research from Princeton economist Sendil Mullainathan shows it actually reduces your cognitive bandwidth. The mental weight of scarcity literally makes people perform worse on problem-solving tests, by the equivalent of losing 13 IQ points. So the trap reinforces itself. The pressure creates decisions that deepen the pressure. But here's what I want you to understand. This stage ends not when you earn more money, it ends when you change the question you're asking. Most people here ask, how do I get through this month? The people who escape ask, how does this system work, and what's the first lever I can pull? That shift from surviving to studying is what opens the door to stage 2. But stage 2 has a trap most people consider success. The comfort illusion is where the majority of middle-class life is spent, and it is the most dangerous stage on this entire ladder. Not because things are bad, because things feel fine. You've got a steady income. The bills get paid. There's maybe a month or 2 of savings in the account. You go on vacation once a year. From the outside, and importantly, from the inside, this looks like stability. It isn't. Here's the math. Median American household income is around $74,000, but median household net worth excluding home equity is under $35,000. That means the average person with a decent income has accumulated almost nothing in actual assets. They're performing financial stability, not building it. The spending patterns that define this stage are fascinating. A 2023 Bankrate study found that 57% of Americans couldn't cover 3 months of expenses from savings, but those same households are spending an average of $497 per month on non-essential goods. The lifestyle is real. The foundation underneath it isn't. What traps people here is something called the consumption identity. Trap the idea that the things you own are a signal of where you belong. You buy at a level to match the stage you want people to think you're in, rather than building toward it. And this level has one more brutal feature. It makes you risk averse, because now you have something to protect, even if that something is mostly an image. The escape from stage 2 requires one uncomfortable realization. Comfort bought on income is not security. Security is only built through ownership. And that brings us to the stage that actually changes the trajectory of your financial life. Stage 3 is the inflection point, the moment the curve actually bends. For the first time, you have something beyond income. You have optionality. Maybe it's a side business generating $1,000 a month. Maybe it's a brokerage account with assets appreciating in the background. Maybe it's a high-income skill set that gives you alternatives to your current employer. Whatever the specific form, the structural shift is the same. You are no longer 100% dependent on a single stream of income that stops the moment you stop working. This is the stage that research from the Brookings Institution identifies as the actual dividing line in long-term wealth outcomes, not income level, not education level, asset ownership. Households with even modest asset bases, a few months of savings, some investment accounts, a small side business recover from financial shocks dramatically faster than households with equivalent income but zero assets. Because income is a flow. Assets are a foundation. But here's where stage 3 fails people, and this is important. The success starts whispering. You've built something. You're ahead of most people. This is enough. And for millions of people, that voice wins. They plateau here indefinitely. The move to stage 4 requires something that feels genuinely uncomfortable. You have to be willing to put what you've built at risk to build something larger. Not recklessly, strategically, but the risk is real. Most people choose comfort at stage 3. The ones who don't find themselves somewhere very different. Stage 4 is where the economics of your life fundamentally restructure. Up to this point, money has been proportional to effort. More work equals more money. Less work equals less money. It's a direct exchange. At stage 4, that relationship breaks. Your assets generate income independent of your time. Your business runs without requiring your constant presence. Your brand or reputation creates inbound opportunities you didn't have to chase. You've built leverage, and leverage is the single most important concept in wealth building that almost no one teaches explicitly. Warren Buffett has said that if you can't find a way to make money while you sleep, you'll work until you die. That's not a philosophical statement. It's a description of the mechanics separating stage 3 from stage 4. At this level, the focus shifts from income to net worth, from earning to owning. The data here is stark. Federal Reserve data shows the top 10% of wealth holders own 89% of all corporate equities and mutual fund shares. Not because they earn more per hour, because they own assets that compound over time rather than paychecks that reset to zero every 2 weeks. But stage 4 has its own price, and I want to be honest about this, because most finance content won't be. To get here and stay here requires a level of discipline, focus, and selective detachment that genuinely costs you in other areas. Relationships can suffer. Free time compresses. You make decisions people around you don't understand, and some of them will say so directly. The question isn't whether those costs exist. They do. The question is whether you've consciously chosen the trade-off or stumbled into it. Because stage 5 is where the game changes entirely, and not in the way most people picture it. At stage 5, wealth has crossed a threshold where the psychology of money transforms completely. The number often cited by researchers studying financial psychology is around $10 million in net worth, though the exact figure varies. What the research consistently shows is that beyond a certain asset level, money stops functioning primarily as security and begins functioning primarily as influence and optionality. You don't worry about coverage. You think about allocation, not survival. Strategy at scale. Your decisions now affect other people's financial outcomes, employees, partners, investors, sometimes entire industries. That's a different weight to carry. But here's what nobody talks about at stage 5. It doesn't get quieter. It gets louder. Different. The competition changes. You're no longer measured against average people. You're measured against other people operating at this level, and they are not passive. They are strategic, well-resourced, and experienced. Trust becomes one of the most complex problems you have, not because people are universally malicious, but because incentive structures shift. The people around you have more reasons to manage their relationship with your resources than to engage with you as a person. Morgan Housel, in The Psychology of Money, makes this observation: the hardest financial problem at high wealth levels isn't growing money, it's figuring out what you actually want, now that money is no longer the constraint. Many people who reach stage 5 discover that answer took longer than the wealth did. And then there is stage 6, which is so rare and so different in nature that it almost requires a separate framework to describe. Stage 6 is where personal wealth becomes institutional force. This is no longer about net worth in the traditional sense. The numbers are too large to emotionally register in daily life. What matters here is what the wealth does to the systems it builds, the institutions it funds, the outcomes it shapes across decades and generations. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Gates. These aren't just names on buildings, they're examples of wealth that restructured entire sectors of society long after the individuals themselves were gone. That's the defining characteristic of stage 6, permanence. The impact outlasts the person. And here is the genuinely strange thing about this stage that I find worth sitting with. At stage 6, visibility often decreases rather than increases. The wealthiest institutional power structures in the world operate through boards, foundations, intermediaries, and holding companies, not through personal branding or public display. The person who needs to be seen is usually not the most powerful one in the room, which means the entire cultural narrative of wealth, the visible luxury, the status signaling, the public displays, is largely a stage 2 and stage 3 behavior. The further up this ladder, the less any of it is necessary. What stage 6 ultimately asks, in its final form, is a philosophical question. What are you building this for? Not what are you building? For what? And that question, more than any financial metric, is what separates a stage from a destination. Stage 6 is where personal wealth becomes institutional force. This is no longer about net worth in the traditional sense. The numbers are too large to emotionally register in daily life. What matters here is what the wealth does the systems it builds, the institutions it funds, the outcomes it shapes across decades and generations. Rockefeller, Carnegie, Gates. These aren't just names on buildings, they're examples of wealth that restructured entire sectors of society long after the individuals themselves were gone. That's the defining characteristic of stage 6, permanence. The impact outlasts the person. And here is the genuinely strange thing about this stage that I find worth sitting with. At stage 6, visibility often decreases rather than increases. The wealthiest institutional power structures in the world operate through boards, foundations, intermediaries, and holding companies, not through personal branding or public display. The person who needs to be seen is usually not the most powerful one in the room, which means the entire cultural narrative of wealth, the visible luxury, the status signaling, the public displays is largely a stage 2 and stage 3 behavior. The further up this ladder, the less any of it is necessary. What stage 6 ultimately asks, in its final form, is a philosophical question. What are you building this for? Not what are you building? For what? And that question, more than any financial metric, is what separates a stage from a destination. So, 6 stages, 1 ladder. Here's what I want you to take from this that most of these frameworks miss. This is not a morality ladder. Being at stage 1 is not a character failure. Being at stage 6 is not evidence of virtue. This is a mechanical description of how financial systems work and what they require at each level. The question isn't which level makes you a good person. The question is, which level do you want to be operating at, and what are you actually doing right now that moves you toward or away from it? Because your habits are always voting. Every purchase is a vote. Every hour is a vote. Every decision about what to consume versus what to build is a vote. And votes compound. Here's my recommendation for where to start. Regardless of your current stage, if you're at stage 1 or 2, the single highest leverage move is building a 3-month emergency fund before any other financial goal. Not investing, not side businesses. A cash buffer that buys you decision-making space. That is the bridge to stage 3. If you're at stage 3, stop optimizing income and start building assets, even small ones. The psychological shift of owning something that grows while you're not watching it is more valuable than whatever the immediate return is. If you're at stage 4 or above, the work is internal more than external. Get clear on what you're building toward not just what you're building. If this framework was useful, share it with someone stuck between stages. Sometimes the clarity is the thing that's missing, not the capability. I'll see you in the next one.